Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2022, and specifically that release which was made earlier this year, which is the Infernal Affairs Trilogy set. And this set is given the comprehensive spine number designation of 1159. Now, specifically, I'd like to focus on one film which is featured within this great set. And it is a film which is described as being from the year 2003. And the filmmakers are Andrew Lau Wai-keung and Alan Mak. And the name of the film is right here. Infernal Affairs 2. From the year 2003, and it has a great cast included, in which are Edison Chen Kun-hye and Sean-Yu Man-lok and Anthony Wong Chao-sang, Eric Tsang Chi-wai, Karina Lau, Ka-ling, and others. And this is the work once again from Andrew Lau Wai-keung and Alan Mak. And the screenplay is Alan Mak and Felix Chung Man-keung. And this is, of course, the work which is Infernal Affairs 2. And please pardon me once again for my poor pronunciation. I hope you can forgive me. I am doing my very best. It is a fascinating turn of events. This is a fascinating film, a fascinating follow-up to the previous work, which is Infernal Affairs. And this is described as a prequel. This is described as a follow-up, and the word prequel, I think, is used reasonably and appropriately, because we understand, again, trying to talk about the plot or story dynamics of this work, Infernal Affairs 2, we understand that we are, in fact, covering the characters that we had met in the previous film, Infernal Affairs. In particular, these characters are, well, we have our main characters that we had met in the previous film, and in that previous film, Infernal Affairs, they had been portrayed by Andy Lau and Tony Leung, respectively. But here we meet the same characters, but they are now portrayed by Edison Chen and Sean-Yu. Now, we should also point out that we had actually seen Edison Chen and Sean-Yu portray these characters in moments in the previous film. So there is, in that way, this wonderful poetic sense of continuity between the first film and now the second film. And so in that way, there is this connectivity. In the same token, their roles, in a manner of speaking, are expanded for purposes of this prequel universe approach. And so we have the events that are in specific points of the 1990s, leading up to, I understand, 1997. And so we have the backstory, as it were, how the characters ended up the way they were when we met them in the first film. We get that backstory and a very fascinating turn of events. Now, that's not the end of the story, because, of course, we meet other really fascinating and intriguing characters within this universe, some of whom we have met before in the first film, Infernal Affairs, and yet others we are perhaps meeting for the first time. And now, so what do I mean by this? So, for example, we have seen, have we not, we have met the characters that are portrayed by Anthony Wong and Eric Tsang, respectively. We have met their characters in the first film, and we see, again, their, say, background or build-up or character progression, the events that one can say they experienced that led them to the places that they find themselves, respectively, when we meet them in Infernal Affairs. We get that, in a sense, backstory or backstories, because there are many stories going on here in Infernal Affairs too. And this is also a really intriguing and very delicately intricate and so clever way in which this film, Infernal Affairs, seems to be progressing the story forward in a manner of speaking by using past chronology. So there's already a sense of a type of poetic juxtaposition of seemingly contradictory chronological, say, focal points in a manner of speaking, but all towards the same purpose, the same end, which is to further elaborate upon or enhance or even shed light on the psychological portraits and profiles of these characters that we meet. Now, this is a very key point. Again, it's a point that was brought up by the filmmakers themselves in one of the supplements for the previous disc for Infernal Affairs. That is that this film, or the Infernal Affairs, and therefore Infernal Affairs 2, are films that can be seen as psychological dramas. And they are, of course, too, many things at once. They are action-adventure thrillers, they are spy films, they are suspense films, police, criminal films, and the like. And indeed, we have that same dynamic of the informant and the mole, the parallel structure, the mirror imaging, police and the criminals, quote unquote, the good characters and the quote unquote bad characters. But of course, we use air quotes when we use those phrases because we understand in the world of Infernal Affairs, and indeed Infernal Affairs 2, that line can be blurred oh so ambiguously and with a sense of haze and fog that is purposefully and poetically applied. This is yet another example of this intriguing setup. Now, one thing to keep in mind, as we've mentioned, is that this film can be described as a prequel. And perhaps to some, by virtue of the nature of the prequel, maybe one might say that a film like Infernal Affairs 2 is one that does not necessarily hold within it as many quote-unquote surprises because of the fact that as it's a prequel, we automatically know its endpoint. In other words, we automatically know the stuff that happened in the previous film. Thus, where are the surprises? Because if we know the endpoint, then we are not going to be surprised. Well, I would suggest that there's nothing could be farther from the truth. I think, on the contrary, Infernal Affairs 2, the fact that it's a prequel, first of all, holds within it the way in which we can further go along and investigate and identify with and be engaged with the psychological dramas of these characters. And also, maybe as an example of that, we can also go along with a lot of the surprises. There are so many surprises in this film, and that sense of surprise is, I think, is inherently intertwined with how the characters are presenting themselves to us, or how the filmmakers are presenting the characters. Case in point, the film focuses also on, say, the Anthony Wong character and the Eric Sang character, who we met in the previous film, Infernal Affairs, and we understood that they were on more or less opposite sides of the law. But this film, Infernal Affairs 2, opens in a way that really potentially threatens or shatters or destroys or obliterates that type of setup that we might have held with regard to those characters that we saw in the first film. And it starts with that shattering, earth-shattering premise. This film, Infernal Affairs 2, starts with that earth-shattering premise. In other words, characters that we think we knew by meeting them in the first film, perhaps we don't even know at all. And it's that point in time, and it's that basis upon which we then get to know these characters, and we see the growth and development, and indeed the surprises and twists and turns in those character arcs that led them to this initial place of almost who are these people, in a manner of speaking, to that place that we see them in Infernal Affairs. That is where the surprises lie, I would suggest. And indeed, the character arcs of characters like the Anthony Wong character, like the Eric Sang character, this is so intriguing a premise. Thus, again, the idea of the surprise or the twist. Plot twists, yes, they might be described plot twists. Character twists, that might be another way to describe it. Character surprises, that might be another way to describe it. This is filled with them to the brim, thus almost in a way making us perhaps question, or making us reassess, or making us rethink how we might have otherwise viewed the first film, Infernal Affairs. Now that is, I think, one point one key critical point of what can make a successful prequel/sequel or follow-up film. This is a very successful point and a very clever point in the way that this film, Infernal Affairs, is essentially, or Infernal Affairs 2, excuse me, is using this stuff of the world and in a sense twisting it, but twisting it also in a way that is still organically consistent with who we met in the first film, what we had seen in the first film. This is not some kind of radical departure. This does still feel very familiar while expanding upon new ground, while also preserving the inherent nature of the prequel status, thus creating, I think, a very geniusly constructed work indeed of Infernal Affairs 2. Now, as I mentioned, this is a film that is also, there are a lot of action beats to it. There are moments of intense sort of physical action, as well as moments of intense emotional, epic, operatic points of drama, and those occur between the characters. Now, there are moments of high tension because of, as I say, this idea of the mole and the identity of the mole and identity crises. This is all very much embedded in the work of Infernal Affairs 2, the continuation of the crime saga, the triad structure, the organized crime structure. This is also embedded in this film, Infernal Affairs 2, in such a great way. There's also, as I mentioned, the way in which friendships and loyalties are tested. We saw this in Infernal Affairs 2. We also see it in this brilliantly poetic way in Infernal Affairs. We saw it in the first film, Infernal Affairs. Now we see it as well here in such a brilliantly poetic way in Infernal Affairs 2. Friendship and loyalties tested to the point of perhaps betrayal. Also, we see romance, and we see ways in which characters are trying to connect with each other and perhaps succeeding or failing. And we see moments of passion and sharp intelligence and ways in which characters are influenced by others. Case in point, we have this really one of the most memorable characters in the entire Infernal Affairs saga, one can say. I mean, it's a saga that's filled, of course, with so many memorable characters, but one of the most memorable characters is that character who's portrayed by Cornelia Lau. Her presence and her character is someone that perhaps can be said is of real primary significance to this world of Infernal Affairs 2, such that we can perhaps see how this has certain significant roots that it could be said to be on display in Infernal Affairs. We might not necessarily have met her before, but we see ways in which her presence here in Infernal Affairs 2 is so much filled with impact, dire impact, significant impact, stresses, moments of high, intense emotion and the like, such as to create a real, maybe emotional weight and a real sense of how the trajectory goes the way it goes and why it goes the way it goes, and the human reasons as to why the trajectory turns the way it turns, leading up to the events that we understand will make up Infernal Affairs. So this is my way, therefore, to say that Infernal Affairs 2 is another wild ride. It is so clever, it is so human, it is so emotional. It feels very much part of the same, cut from the same cloth, in a manner of speaking, as that of Infernal Affairs. There's an organic unity and structure that we can say is very much linked to what we had seen in Infernal Affairs because of the plot, because of the characters that we meet, but also because of the certain thematic concerns. The idea of levels is also there that we saw in the first film. And it's done in a really keen and clever way. This idea of the character levels, hidden agendas, the idea of cross and double cross and triple cross, quadruple cross, etc. The parallels and mirror imaging, and that in turn leads to cause and effect, level upon level upon level. The thematically layered levels of the historical consequences. This is a film set in the 1990s, leading up to 1997. So there's this idea of decadence and breakdown. There's this idea of the international pull and weight of the story structure. But there's also the sense of the breakdown and things leading to the edge that we see in the world of the first film, Infernal Affairs. So that, I think, has this really strong socio-political parallel as embedded in this film. A tied so closely with the key point, or one of the key points in modern Hong Kong history, which is 1997. So, really wonderful way this layering process is occurring. Also, too, we mentioned the religious or philosophical Buddhist underpinnings of the films Infernal Affairs and Infernal Affairs 2. It's a similar route in terms of the way in which suffering and pain and sorrow, they are presented here, and the idea and the outgrowth of those, and perhaps the moral stakes and the psychological stakes, and what is given up in terms of, say, evading suffering or causing suffering. Let's put it that way. So these and other reasons make this film, Infernal Affairs 2, very much a close-knit film to Infernal Affairs in a very seamless and organic way, thus making for a real fascinating follow-up film indeed. At the same token, or in the same breath, one can say that Infernal Affairs is doing things that are very surprising, turns and twists that could be said to be very radically different from Infernal Affairs, very surprising from that point. So one who is watching these films for the first time, and one who's therefore maybe exploring the world of Infernal Affairs 2 after watching Infernal Affairs, there are so many ways in this film will just blow one's socks off, in a manner of speaking. And I remember when I first saw this film, again many years ago, I first saw this film. I wasn't expecting much, to be perfectly honest, going into the film. But after watching it and after I was through with the film, I was left stunned and mesmerized. And I was just, my mind was so, it was like in knots. Because I had a preconceived notion that I thought I knew Infernal Affairs. I really did. I was watching it so many times. I loved it. And I watched Infernal Affairs 2. And everything that I thought I knew about the first film was just totally undone. But it was undone in a way that still felt consistent and respectful towards the first film, which is a really incredible cinematic feat indeed. What a film this is. I'm so glad it's part of this collection, this Infernal Affairs trilogy collection. This is the work which is Infernal Affairs 2. The Criterion Collection has released this film, Infernal Affairs 2, as part of its set, this wonderful set, which is called the Infernal Affairs Trilogy. And as you can see, this set is a 3-disc Blu-ray set, one of which is, as I mentioned, for Infernal Affairs 2. Now, just a quick note, for purposes of this video discussion only, I have put Infernal Affairs 2, this Blu-ray disc, on this side of the plastic casing. In fact, when I first opened the packaging upon it being arrived at my doorstep in the mail, this Infernal Affairs 2 disc was on this side, not on this side, but I'm just putting it on this side of the packaging, or the casing, just to show it, just to display the disc. Again, just to differentiate this video discussion, that being for Infernal Affairs 2. So this is the Infernal Affairs disc. Now, these films are purported to be based on restorations, and so let me read again from page 30. I'd read this before in the Infernal Affairs video discussion, but let me read the same passage again, which is Infernal Affairs 2, and Infernal Affairs 3 are presented in their original aspect ratio of 2.35 to 1. These 4K digital restorations were undertaken by Media Asia from the 35mm original camera negative at l'Immagine Ritrovata's facilities in Bologna, Italy, and Hong Kong. The original 5.1 surround soundtracks were remastered from the digital audio master files. And so, much like my experience with the Criterion disc of Infernal Affairs, my experience with Infernal Affairs 2 under this Criterion release, purported to be based on this transfer or this restoration, is one that I consider to be somewhat consistent with my experience, my admittedly limited experience with watching this film, Infernal Affairs 2. I've never seen this film in the theater. I've only experienced it through prior, say, rentals or DVD rentals, and also purchases. For instance, I have this DVD set, Infernal Affairs, from Tartan Asia Extreme, one of the discs here being Infernal Affairs 2. the others being Infernal Affairs and Infernal Affairs 3. But so this is my experience with this film, Infernal Affairs 2. So I have this sense of how I described it earlier, a type of, and I mean this very, very complimentarily, which is as a compliment, which is it has this type of video screen sheen. Not all of it, but some points it has that nuance of a video screen sheen that I think adds to the element of the what one might call a type of neo-noir, Hong Kong noir style. And indeed, one of the ways one can describe Infernal Affairs 2 and the other Infernal Affairs films is as a type of neo-noir film. And so I think that type of look gives a sense of thematic consistency, which I find very, very appealing indeed. And one can say that the restoration of Infernal Affairs 2 does have that sense of the one might call, quote unquote, the imperfect, almost slightly nuanced digital way that can be said to be consistent with this idea of the video sheen a la neo-noir. So I know that this has been a point of maybe some criticism in some circles, and I get that, and I think that's a very legitimate and valid criticism to make. But again, for me, I find it to be very consistent with how I have experienced this film and also how I view this film in terms of the that type of, say, visual aesthetic, and how that visual aesthetic can, I think, serve the thematic purposes of the work. So all in all, I am very pleased and not at all disappointed with this particular presentation of Infernal Affairs 2. I enjoyed it very, very much. And then, so now let us turn to the supplements, which can be found, again, with each disc. We have a film, and within each disc's presentation, we also have the menu, and the submenu will have supplements usually tied to that particular film. So for the disc for Infernal Affairs 2, we have some supplements that one can say are tied to that film, Infernal Affairs 2. And I should say too that let's remember that we had seen supplements carried over from past releases, such as this release I have here. So it's nice to have some carryover as well. But what do we have in terms of the supplements that are found or included or carried over into this new Criterion Blu-ray release? So first off, we have the commentary, and this commentary is one that is a previous one. Andrew Lau, Wai-keung, and Alan Mak and Felix Chang Man-keung are featured and described in the supplements submenu as being the participants of this great commentary track. Again, I think it has been made available but elsewhere, but if you haven't heard or haven't seen the film yet with this commentary track, it's a great place to go. Please check it out if you can. Again, much like the commentary track done for Infernal Affairs, this commentary track done for Infernal Affairs 2 does focus a lot on the psychological backstories, a lot of the character underpinnings, choices that were made in terms of development, plot development, character development, and the like. So that is a very strong, I think, character-centric focus to it, which I think is very, very helpful indeed. And it's also very indicative, as I argued earlier, it's very indicative, I would suggest, of how this film is very much at its heart a psychological drama. So there's some really thrilling, exciting, suspenseful moments in it, don't get me wrong, but it's also very much a psychological drama that drives the film forward because of that sense of, say, dramatic urgency. So it's a great commentary track, much like the previous discussion or the previous film, Infernal Affairs discussion, where we had a commentary track there as well. Here for this commentary track, again, I do not have, unfortunately, I don't have the ability, I'm not fluent in the Cantonese language, so I need to rely on the English subtitles when I watch this film with the commentary track. And the subtitles do not say, they don't provide the benefit, I understand, of telling us who is speaking during certain points of the commentary track. So we have to get a sense of who's speaking by the voice and or by the comments that are being made. And one can get a sense of the context of those comments, and based on that context, one can make a reasonable guess as to who is speaking about what at a particular point in time in the commentary. So I think that's okay. Again, it just would have been, I think, that extra nice thing to have had that indication of who's actually speaking in the subtitle. So that's one point. Another point, much like the previous film's commentary track, I think there are other people that are featured on the commentary track other than the three, the directors and the screenwriters. So because there are a lot of comments, for instance, on the performance and the acting, and anecdotes that seem to be from the actor's perspective. And so please keep that in mind as well. We do have a number of other participants, I think, in this commentary track other than the three that are named in the menu. But that's okay, because the more the merrier. And again, it's a great opportunity to hear a full-bodied, really well thought out series of comments from these participants who know so much about this film, Infernal Affairs 2. And continuing on, because we also have the supplements that are included in the supplement submenu for the disc for Infernal Affairs 2. And again, these supplements can be said to be linked specifically to Infernal Affairs 2, in addition to that commentary track, which we've just spoken of. So, and again, some of these supplements, right, you'll have seen those who maybe have Infernal Affairs in past editions prior to the Criterion release, you may have seen these supplements already, but then those who have not will be engaging with these for the first time. So, but in any event, what do we have included in this second disc? We have a making of documentary, 21 minutes, and this is also, I think, we get Media Asia, and we have also the idea of the aspects of drama and character. We also get a sense of, again, characters that we've met before, but also characters that we meet for the first time. And I mentioned too, for example, the character of Corinne Alao's character, and how there's a really deep significance in terms of what she does and what she represents, and her effect on a number of characters that we also come to meet over the course of this film, or these films, I should say. So this is, I think, a great example of how this making of documentary is really quite helpful. So, and really very informative, and very filled with a lot of information. So this is one place to go. So there's the making of documentary, or short documentary, approximately 21 minutes. And then also we get the confidential file. This is approximately 5 minutes. So this is more maybe quote unquote fly on the wall, behind the scenes footage. And we see, for instance, the start of the shoot, and we see certain shots that are being performed, or prepped, or practiced, or rehearsed, etc. Again, 5 minutes. So it's somewhat brief. And it's something that we had seen associated with the other film. Again, it's nice to get a sense of the rapport and the atmosphere on set. It's always very helpful. So here's the confidential file component of the supplements. And then continuing on with the supplements, we have a section which is deleted scenes and blooper. And so we have a number of scenes, I think 4 in total, and then the blooper section, approximately 2 minutes. So the deleted scenes, I think total about, let's see, 7, 8, 9 or 10 minutes total. And then the bloopers, plus there's a special effects shot as well. So, and the bloopers they do focus on different characters that we meet as well. Shan Yu's character, Edison Chen's character, etc. There's a little detail about the police, and there's a watch and a gun, etc. So there's an interesting set of things that happen. So more character beats, more things that it could have been interesting had they been included. But again, we still get the advantage of watching this section here. So this is also included as part of these supplements. And then the supplements are rounded out with a trailer. And so that rounds out the Infernal Affairs 2 disc supplement. Just a quick word. Once again, I think for people who have the Infernal Affairs films on previous, say, non-Criterion editions, one might have wanted more in terms of these supplements, and I can totally understand that. I think, especially when compared with the first disc, Infernal Affairs, maybe in terms of quantity, there aren't that many here. We do have the commentary track we've seen previously, which is great, but I think it would have been nice to have more, say, Criterion-produced new supplements. We had the new supplement, the new discussion between the filmmakers, in the first disc supplemental menu, Andrew Lau's Andrew Lau and Alan Mack's discussion where they talk. But remember, in that discussion, I think they were speaking primarily about infernal affairs. I think they made only very, very brief comments on Infernal Affairs too. So I think it would have been really lovely to have had maybe a continuation of their conversation, focusing perhaps on Infernal Affairs too, with the same degree of, say, specificity that they did as featured in that Infernal Affairs supplement for the first disc. So I would have loved to have seen that. That would have been very fascinating indeed. But it's okay because what we still get is stuff that's still very much very filled with information, very informative, very helpful for a further exploration of this, as I say, fascinating work, which is Infernal Affairs 2. Now, to round out our discussion, let me refer very briefly to this booklet. Again, for purposes of this video discussion, I have removed the booklet prior to the video start. I should point out too that at the end of this video discussion series on this set overall, it is my plan to speak with a little bit more detail in my comment about the essay that's included here, because it is a comprehensive essay writing. It's a really great one. So I'll save my comments on the comprehensive essay for a little bit later in a separate video. With respect to Infernal Affairs 2, I should point out that much like Infernal Affairs, there is a brief section starting around pages 8 and 9. And then going on into 10 and 11, that's focusing in on Infernal Affairs 2. So we get some pictures that could be said to be relevant to Infernal Affairs 2, a little write-up about the film, and then on the following pages, we have a cast and crew and production credits breakdown as well. So there is a little section here devoted exclusively to Infernal Affairs 2, but then it goes on to, among other points, talk about the series overall, the trilogy overall. So it's a really great place to go. My suggestion is to read the essay only after you have seen all three films. And so if you've seen only Infernal Affairs, or if you've seen only Infernal Affairs and Infernal Affairs 2, I would wait. Don't read the essay until you've seen Infernal Affairs 3. You've seen all of the films, because as I say, it is a comprehensive essay. But I will talk about the comprehensive essay a little bit later in a separate video. But for now, please note that this booklet does include some information, some detail about Infernal Affairs 2, which is a great film, by the way. Another wonderful sort of follow-up. It is a companion work. It's also work that in many ways, intriguing ways, stands on its own. It has its own, it forges its own identity while still remaining or maintaining a sense of organic integrity with the first film. And that is a really incredible cinematic feat indeed. What a film this is. So exciting, so emotional, and so unforgettable. This is the work which is Infernal Affairs 2. All right, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great, great, great movies, including Infernal Affairs 2. So until the next video, my dear, dear friends, stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.